Hello everyone, I'm Eric Rain, and today I'm going to show you what I believe is not only the strongest Paladin build, but probably one of the strongest builds in the entire game, period. And it's a build that you probably never heard of, because I came up with it completely by myself. It combines no fewer than 4 different subclasses, 3 of which were added only recently. It's incredibly fun, highly versatile, and perhaps most importantly, you can start playing it as early as Act 2, and I'm sure you're going to love it. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. As I mentioned, this build combines 4 different subclasses, so let's quickly go over what each of them brings to the table. The core of the build is of course the Paladin and its Divine Smite, which we get at level 2. So yeah, technically this is a Paladin Smite build, but I promise you it's quite different compared to many other Paladin builds you'll find online. The second most important class is Warlock, specifically the new Hexblade subclass. Thanks to the Hexblade, our weapon attacks will scale with charisma instead of the usual strength or dexterity. On top of that, our attacks will have a chance to apply Hexblade's curse, which increases our critical hit chance and boosts our overall damage output. We only take a single level in Hexblade. After that, we invest 6 levels into Wizard, choosing the Blade Singing subclass. This gives us an incredibly powerful buff that increases our armor class, movement speed, and constitution saving throws, which, as a reminder, are crucial for maintaining concentration. At this point, the build is already extremely strong. Level 9 is more than enough for it. However, if you want to push it even further, levels 10 through 12 should go into Shadow Magic Sorcerer. This gives us additional spell slots for Divine Smites, access to the incredibly useful Darkness spell, and meta magic options such as Quicken spell, which can always be useful. Thanks to the sheer number of buffs available to us, a hero with this build is almost impossible to kill. And thanks to the combination of Divine Smite, Booming Blade, and several crit-focused items, it can deal more damage than any Paladin build available before patch 8. So yeah, this build is ridiculously strong. Let's finally break it down in detail. We'll start with leveling, and as always, you'll find all the timestamps in the description. Okay, so here's how we're gonna level the character. As I mentioned earlier, we start with Paladin to get Divine Smite as quickly as possible. The subclass doesn't matter too much since we're only taking 2 levels, but personally I prefer Oath of Vengeance because Inquisitor's Might scales with charisma and provides a pretty respectable damage boost. As for our ability scores, we're focusing on charisma. Not only will it improve our spellcasting, but once we pick up Hexblade subclass, it will also increase our weapon accuracy and damage. Our starting stats will be 8 strength, 8 dexterity, 16 constitution, 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 17 charisma. I'll explain later why we're completely ignoring dexterity for now. At level 2, we finally get Divine Smite. For your fighting style, you can either take defense for additional survivability or dueling for extra damage. The difference isn't huge, but I personally prefer defense on this build. As for our spells, feel free to take whatever you like. I barely use any of the Paladin spells in combat because later on we'll gain access to much stronger options. Next, at level 3, we take our first level in Warlock. For cantrips, we pick up one of the most important parts of the build, Booming Blade. The tooltip doesn't fully show its potential yet, but at higher levels, this cantrip will add a significant amount of thunder damage to our attacks. More importantly, it stacks with Divine Smite, and what's even more important, it works with items that boost cantrip damage. For our second cantrip, I usually take Blade Ward. As mentioned earlier, we choose the Hexblade subclass to use charisma on our attack rolls instead of strength or dexterity. We also gain access to Hexblade's curse as a separate ability. This curse can occasionally be applied automatically, when attacking with a hex-bound weapon, but you can also apply it manually with a 100% success rate. Just keep in mind that the manual version can only be used once per short rest, so we usually want to save it for bosses and mini-bosses. For spells, I recommend taking Hex and Armor of Agathis. At level 4, we start leveling Wizard. For cantrips, I usually take Light and Friends for dialogue checks. You can also grab Mage Hand if you want to. As for spells, I recommend Shield for survivability, Long Strider for mobility, and Mage Armor since we are not going to use any armor. Everything else is largely up to personal preference. At Wizard level 2, we obviously choose Blade Singing. As I mentioned earlier, Blade Song is an incredibly powerful buff. The best part is that activating it doesn't consume either an action or a bonus action. It only uses one charge of Blade Song, and we'll have plenty of those. One thing you should remember, however, is that Blade Song doesn't work while wearing medium or heavy armor. It also only works with specific weapon types, which are listed in the tooltip. As for spells, you can pretty much take whatever you want at this stage. And by the way, choice of Bladesinger weapon doesn't really matter. At the next wizard level, I recommend picking up Mirror Image and Blur. Then at character level 7, your cantrip choice doesn't matter too much, but for spells I personally like Misty Step and Hold Person. For your feat, take Savage Attacker. This feat dramatically increases the damage of our Divine Smites and also boosts our weapon damage overall. At the next level, I usually grab Counterspell. You can also take Knock for exploration if you want. Wizard level 6 is extremely important because it grants us extra attack, allowing us to attack twice with a single action. For spells at this point, take whatever suits your playstyle. As I said before, level 9 is already enough for this build to be extremely powerful. But if you want to push it even further, I highly recommend putting the final 3 levels into the Shadow Magic Sorcerer. And here's why. First of all, Shadow Magic grants us Dark Vision and, more importantly, Strength of the Grave, a passive feature that can save us from a killing blow once per long rest. It's an incredibly useful ability. By the way, I don't usually talk about races in my build guides, but if you want to make absolute strongest version of this build, I highly recommend playing a Half-Orc. Half-Orcs have a passive ability that also prevents them from dying when reduced to 0 hit points, and it stacks with Shadow Sorcerer's passive. On top of that, Half-Orcs deal additional critical hit damage, which is extremely important for this build. Anyway, back to Shadow Magic. At Sorcerer level 2, we will be able to convert sorcery points into spell slots and vice versa. I'll explain later why this feature is so useful for this build. For spells, it doesn't matter too much what you choose. For meta magic, I recommend taking Distance Spell and Twin Spell. Finally, at Sorcerer level 3, we gain access to one of the most important abilities in the entire build, Eye of the Dark, Darkness. This unique spell creates a cloud of magical darkness that blinds creatures inside it. The key detail, however, is that the blindness doesn't affect us, and that's huge. Any attack made against a blinded enemy is rolled with advantage, which means our critical hit chance increases dramatically. On top of that, at Sorcerer level 3, we get another meta magic option, and here you can take Quickened Spell. At this point, I also recommend taking Blindness as your spell, because if you learn it as a wizard, it will benefit from your intelligence and not charisma. What we'll also need to do is raise our charisma to 20. To do that, you either need to get +1 charisma from Auntie Ethel in Act 1 and then get +2 charisma from Mirror of Loss in the Act 3. Or alternatively, you can get +3 charisma solely from the Mirror of Loss. If you don't know how to get +3 charisma from Mirror of Loss, then you can just watch my last video on passive effects. Now that we've covered the abilities, let's move on to the gear that you'll need to make this build significantly stronger. First off, as I said in the beginning of the video, Booming Blade works with items that improve our cantrips. That's why for our armor we take the Potent Robe, because it will add additional damage to our Booming Blade equal to our Charisma modifier. Also, with that thing we can use Mage Armor, which will raise our armor class significantly. For our gloves we take Gloves of Dexterity, because unfortunately there's really no other way for us to raise our dexterity significantly, but we really need it for high initiative and bonus armor class. You should also put on the Diadem of Arcane Synergy because it will also raise our damage equal to our charisma modifier. The last really important item for us is the Knife of the Undermountain King, which raises our critical chance. And as you may know, critical hits work really well with the Divine Smite. I would say that those 4 items are more than enough for this build to be very strong, and as you may have noticed, you can get those quite early on. The gloves and the sword you can buy in the Githyanki Crash. Diadem of Arcane Synergy can be obtained in the same location. Just fight the Inquisitor and pick it up from one of the bodies. The rope is given by Elfira after you rescue tieflings from Moonrise Towers. You can also obtain and use following items. With Killer Sweetheart and the Deadshot Bow will be able to crit much more often, which as I said is really important for this build. As you see, I am also wearing Bind Spike Boots, Cloak of Protection and Ring of Protection for additional survivability. For the amulet you can take the Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet, though for some reason I noticed that I literally never use it. In the late game you can swap the sword with the Duelist's Prerogative, and the amulet you can swap with the Amulet of Greater Health if you want to. Of course, you can find even better items for this build in Act 3, but I don't usually like recommending super late game items since at that point most likely you already have a strong enough build to complete the game. Now let's move on to gameplay so you'll know how this build plays in practice. First, don't forget to apply Bind Hexed Weapon on your blade, otherwise there wasn't much point in taking Hexblade in the first place. Also, don't forget to cast Mage Armor, otherwise you'll be much more squishy. You've probably noticed that we don't actually have that many sorcery points, but you might want to have a bit more of them, not only for meta magic but also for darkness. To get more sorcery points, first you need to convert a level 3 spell slot into sorcery points, specifically a level 3 spell slot. This part is important. After that, recover the spell slot using the Wizard's Arcane Recovery. Doing this immediately brings us up to 6 sorcery points. For regular fights, that's already more than enough. For example, with this amount of sorcery points, we can use 1 darkness and 1 quicken spell. However, if you're as much of a min-maxing nerd as I am and want to extract absolutely everything for the build, you can take things even further. For that, you'll need the Spellcrook's Amulet that you can get after killing one of the guards in Moonrise Towers. With that item, we can now spend a level 5 spell slot to create 5 sorcery points, and then immediately restore that same spell slot using the amulet. And just like that, we're sitting at 11 sorcery points. But we're still not done. If you really want to min-max, you can activate the Illithid passive free cast and then convert 5 sorcery points back into a level 5 spell slot. The result is that you'll still have 11 sorcery points, but now you'll also have an additional level 5 spell slot. There are ways you can take it even further, but usually that's more than enough. Now, would I do this before every random encounter? Probably not, but before a major boss fight, absolutely. For your elixir, I strongly recommend using the Elixir of Viciousness against bosses, because it further increases your critical hit chance, and against regular enemies I prefer using Elixir of Bloodlust, because the additional crit chance in that case doesn't usually do much. I would call everything that we covered so far the camp preparation phase, but you can also prepare right before combat starts. Personally, I like to use Mirror Image, Blur, and activate Blade Song before a fight. Once combat begins, the first thing we need to decide is which damage buff we're going to use, Inquisitor's Might or Hexblade's Curse. My rule of thumb is pretty simple. If there's a particularly dangerous enemy that we're planning to focus down first, I use Hexblade's Curse since it only affects a single target. For everything else, Inquisitor's Might is usually the better choice. Either way, after that we simply walk up and start attacking with Booming Blade, and if we happen to land a critical hit, we immediately follow it up with a Divine Smite using our reaction. You can also use use low-level Divine Smite without a crit if the enemy is very low HP, but otherwise there's usually no reason to waste spell slot on Divine Smite on regular attacks, when we're specifically building around crits. For shield, I personally only allow the level 1 and level 2 versions. The same logic applies to Counterspell. I only keep the level 3 version enabled. I recommend saving Counterspell for truly dangerous spells that cannot be simply ignored through high armor class. If an enemy is casting something like Scorching Ray, there's a good chance that it won't even hit you. And even if it does, you're usually better off spending a level 1 slot on shield afterwards. Anyway, that's enough about reactions. The general gameplay loop is fairly straightforward. We buff ourselves before combat, keep our important buffs active during combat, and then repeatedly attack with Booming Blade while fishing for critical hits. Speaking of critical hits, don't forget to use Darkness whenever possible, and if that's not an option, regular Blindness works as well. Both effects give us advantage against affected enemies, which nearly doubles our critical hit chance. Now, technically, you could achieve something similar with Risky Ring, but that can be risky. Personally, I prefer using Darkness against bosses because it applies Blindness with 100% reliability. However, Blindness tends to perform better against groups of enemies and, unlike Darkness, doesn't require concentration. Also, Darkness is much harder to use if you play with more than 1 or 2 characters. One final thing worth mentioning is just how durable this build actually is. At low HP, you can always reposition yourself using Misty Step and Distance Spell, and recover while the enemies are out of reach. Also, don't forget that Blade Song accumulates restoration charges whenever we land attacks. By ending the song with enough charges stored, we can recover a huge portion of not only our health, but also health of our allies. Here you can see how game-changing this heal can be. And honestly, that's just scratching the surface. Don't forget that we're still playing a wizard. We can learn virtually every spell in the game through scrolls, which makes this build incredibly versatile. Personally, if I were to play a solo honor mode run on this build, I'd definitely grab something like Greater Invisibility to practically become invulnerable if necessary. I know many people know that already, but it's true that invisibility in Baldur's Gate 3 is completely broken. Most enemies simply cannot do anything against it. But yeah, that's the build. Tell me in the comments if you like this build, and also don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss future BG3 videos that I plan to make. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.